Can you drive with a bad shift solenoid? Technically, your car may still drive, and that's exactly why this problem can be easy to ignore. If the transmission is still moving the car, you might think you can keep driving it for now. But being able to drive doesn't necessarily mean it's safe for the transmission. Because when a shift solenoid isn't controlling the transmission properly, every delayed shift, harsh engagement, or slipping condition can put additional stress on internal components. And the longer those problems continue, the greater the risk of turning a relatively small issue into much more expensive transmission damage. So the real question isn't just, can the car still drive? It's, how long can you keep driving it before that shifting problem turns into something much more expensive? How long can you drive with a bad transmission solenoid? So, how long can you drive with a bad transmission solenoid? There isn't a reliable mileage or time limit. One vehicle may continue driving for a while with an occasional shifting problem, while another can quickly develop more serious symptoms. So, instead of asking how many miles you have left, pay attention to what the transmission is actually doing. If it's hesitating before shifting, slamming into gear, slipping, or getting stuck in one gear, that's a much more important warning than the number of miles you've already driven. Because once the transmission starts behaving abnormally, continuing to drive doesn't necessarily mean you're just living with an annoying shift problem. It may mean you're continuing to drive with incorrect hydraulic pressure or shift control, which can put additional stress on the transmission. And that's why the type of shifting problem you're experiencing becomes so important, because it can tell you what the transmission may be dealing with as you keep driving. What a failing shift solenoid does to the transmission. To understand why continuing to drive can become a problem, you first have to understand what the shift solenoid is controlling. The solenoid helps control the flow and pressure of transmission fluid that the transmission uses to apply different gears. When that control isn't working properly, the transmission may not apply the next gear the way it should. And that's when you may start noticing something that seems like a simple shifting problem. The transmission may hesitate before changing gears. It may take longer than normal to engage, or it may suddenly jerk or slam into the next gear. At first, you might think it's just a rough shift, but the important part is what that rough shift is telling you. The transmission isn't controlling that gear change the way it was designed to. And depending on what's actually causing the problem, continued abnormal shifting can put additional stress on the transmission, so the shifting problem itself is the clue. But what matters is what happens next, because once these symptoms start getting worse, they can progress into 3 much more serious problems. Number 1. Stuck in gear or limp mode. And if that shifting problem becomes more serious, the transmission may stop shifting normally altogether. In some cases, the transmission computer can detect a control problem and put the vehicle into a protective mode, commonly called limp mode. Instead of shifting through all the gears normally, the transmission may stay in one gear, often leaving you with very limited acceleration. And this is where a problem that started as an occasional rough shift can suddenly affect how safely you can drive the vehicle. The car may still move, but getting up to speed can become difficult. Passing another vehicle can become a problem, and driving at highway speeds may no longer be practical. The important thing is, limp mode isn't the transmission randomly giving up. It's the vehicle reacting to a problem it has detected. So if your car suddenly gets stuck in one gear after experiencing shifting problems, that's not something to simply drive through and hope goes away. It's a sign that the transmission needs to be diagnosed before you continue putting more stress on it. But if you continue driving while the transmission is stuck in a gear or struggling to shift, another problem can become even more serious. Number 2. Slipping and overheating. But the bigger concern comes when the transmission starts slipping. If the shift solenoid isn't controlling fluid pressure correctly, the transmission may not apply the clutch packs firmly enough. Instead of holding the internal components securely, the clutch packs can begin to slip. And every time that happens, friction creates heat. That heat can break down the transmission fluid, while excessive heat can accelerate wear on the internal transmission components. This is why continuing to drive with a shifting problem can become much more expensive than the original solenoid problem. You might still be able to drive the car, but you could be doing it while the transmission is generating excessive heat and wearing its internal components. And that's the part that's easy to miss. The vehicle can still feel drivable, while the condition inside the transmission is getting worse. So if the transmission is slipping repeatedly, that's no longer just a shifting complaint. It's a warning that continued driving could increase the damage. And if the pressure control problem continues, the consequences can go beyond heat and internal wear. Number 3. Loss of forward or reverse operation. And in a more severe failure, the problem can eventually go beyond rough shifting, limp mode, or slipping. If a shift solenoid becomes stuck or fails badly enough to disrupt fluid control, the transmission may no longer be able to engage the gears properly. You could lose normal forward operation, or in a more serious case, even reverse may become unavailable. At that point, this is no longer a transmission problem. You can simply work around by driving more carefully. The vehicle may still have an engine that starts normally, but if the transmission can't reliably engage a gear, the car isn't going anywhere. So when does the risk become high enough that you should stop driving? What starts as an occasional hesitation or harsh shift can develop into a problem that leaves you stuck where the vehicle finally stops cooperating. So if the transmission is already slipping badly, refusing to shift, or suddenly loses forward or reverse operation, that's the point where continuing to drive it is no longer a reasonable gamble. When should you stop driving? So when should you actually stop driving? If the transmission is only showing an occasional shift issue, that doesn't necessarily mean the vehicle has to be towed immediately. But if it's slipping severely, refusing to shift, getting stuck in one gear, or suddenly entering limp mode, that's a different situation. Those are signs that the transmission may not be operating correctly enough to keep driving normally. And if the vehicle is struggling to engage a gear, repeatedly slipping, or behaving unpredictably when you accelerate, it's better to stop driving and have the problem diagnosed. Because at that point, you're no longer just dealing with an annoying shift. You're taking the chance of turning a transmission control problem into much more expensive internal damage. If you need to get the vehicle somewhere for diagnosis, having it towed can be the safer option when the transmission is already slipping badly or refusing to shift. The goal isn't to panic every time the transmission shifts roughly. It's knowing when the symptoms have crossed the line from something that needs attention to something you shouldn't continue driving through. Don't assume the shift solenoid is the only problem. But before you decide that the shift solenoid is the reason you shouldn't keep driving, there's one important thing to remember. A shifting problem doesn't automatically prove that the solenoid is bad. Low transmission fluid, dirty or degraded fluid, wiring problems, or other transmission control issues can sometimes create similar symptoms. That's why the symptoms should be treated as clues, not a final diagnosis. If your transmission is shifting poorly, the first step is to confirm what's actually causing the problem. Check the transmission fluid level and condition, verify any diagnostic trouble codes, and inspect the related wiring and connectors before replacing parts based on the shifting symptom alone. Because you don't want to replace a solenoid only to discover that the real problem was somewhere else. The goal isn't simply to find a part that could cause the symptom, it's to confirm the part that's actually causing the problem. So, can you drive with a bad shift solenoid? The car may still move, but that doesn't mean you should keep driving it normally. If it's slipping, shifting violently, getting stuck in one gear, or entering limp mode, continuing to drive can increase the risk of overheating and internal transmission damage. And there isn't a safe number of miles you can count on. The safest approach is to diagnose the problem early, before a shifting problem turns into a much more expensive transmission repair. And remember, a shifting problem doesn't automatically prove the solenoid is bad. Find the cause first, then replace the part only when the diagnosis confirms it. If this video helped you understand what's happening with your transmission, hit the like button and subscribe for more practical diagnostic tips. And if you're dealing with a shift solenoid problem right now, let me know in the comments what your transmission is doing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.